I've just started another journey. Now, this isn't too far from my place. It's only about 1 kilometre. This is a place called Rocky Creek. Now, it's an Aboriginal site where they've done carvings and all sorts of things, and that's another story. But today's story is about Cobb Co. It's where the Cobb Co used to pass through. Now, these imprints that you can see in the rock here, you can see the marks from the old stagecoaches as they used to pass through here, because this was their passing lane. And just up the road there near my place was where they had a changeover, where they changed horses to move on to the next part. And I want to actually take you on a bit of a journey to tell you more about it, how it all started and where it all started. But I'll tell you more about that a bit later.
G'day, my name's Jamie Hazelden and I've been travelling this great country for many, many years. And what I want to share with you is the great places that I've been to and the places that you can only imagine of getting to. I want to show you and introduce to you some of the colourful characters, sit round a campfire and reminisce and talk about the journey and the places that we're going to go to. So come along with me as I share this journey with you.
Proudly supported by and powered by Custom Lithium. Well, we've travelled from Bushman's all the way here to Surat. Now, that's 390 kilometres from there, or 400 kilometres from Brisbane to here. Now, this place is really well known in the history books for the old Cobb Co, because this was the last transfer station here in Queensland. As you can see here, this is all the Cobb Co mail runs that they had going just in the Queensland area. And we're not talking about New South Wales, Victoria and all those sort of places, but the incredible part is they had 30,000 horses and they used 6,000 horses every day. And they used to do the transfer where they run the horses between 10 and 15 kilometres or 10 mile to the next transfer station, and then they would rest them horses, feed them horses with oats and water and everything else, and then get the next horses. Well, we're unlucky because the actual stagecoach itself is back where I live at the Glasshouse Mountains, getting all restored and repainted. Now, this is a replica of the stagecoach. Now, the stagecoach normally sits right behind me here. It was actually number 177. And the incredible part about it is if you look into the detail of how they used to run these coaches, the best seat they reckon in the house is with the driver right at the front there. Now the driver, he has the mail handy so he can give it off as they're travelling. Each passenger could only take aboard with them 6 kilos in weight. So it was all set up very interestingly, and of course you've got your storage up on top there. So it's pretty amazing.
Just after leaving the town of Surat, I saw a sign for an Aboriginal shelter. And well, I just had to go and check this out.
Now, not your traditional sort of shelter, but it's an old humpy that was lived in probably the 60s, early 60s, something like that. But it was the Mundy family. They bought up in this little shack, humpy, whatever you want to call it. They brought up their husband, wife and 2 or 3 kids and then grandkids. So it was quite interesting because when you have a look at the size, it's not that big. But you know, you don't need an awful lot when you're thinking about that side of things, because you've got plenty of shade and shelter here and you're on the banks of a river and you just really need it for somewhere to sleep. But there's a great little story on the Cleven family and the Mundy family here. But it's just something to check out when you're in Surat.
Just a few kilometres down the road, it was time to hit the dirt. So now it's time to drop some air out of the tyres. We'll make it a bit smoother ride, not so hard on the old suspension.
Now, an interesting little fact about the Cobb Co. Now, it was founded, well, it started in 1853 and it really got going in about 1854. Now, it was founded by a fella by the name of Freeman Cobb and 3 other fellas, and they're all from America. They travelled over to Australia and set this up using American stagecoaches, which was quite interesting. But they only stayed here for 3 years to get the business going, and then it was off and running. But the first one started off in Melbourne, and it went from Bendigo right up through to Ballarat. And that was when it got to the have of what was happening, and that was the goldfields. Because originally, you know, it was just like a taxi service, but for moving people throughout the country, but then it became a mail service, and then it went on to being moving gold and money and all sorts of things from there. So very interesting, but it all based and started in Melbourne.
Well, here's our first point of interest and some great information here.
Well, what we've come across is on Frogmore Road, which is on the Cobb Co track that we're tracking alongside of. Something we wouldn't consider or think about too much, and these are called corduroys. Now, the name corduroys is a funny thing. It actually comes from the linings of the old corduroy pants, or the fabric material, and that's why they call it the corduroys. But what's happened is they lay it down in the wet areas so the Cobb Co coaches can go across it. But I was just thinking about it, looking at these, how hard would it have been for the horses to get through here as well? You know, you can imagine how uncomfortable it would be for the person in the coach, the driver, the whole lot, because there's no suspension in coaches. They reckon this was the roughest sort of terrain to go across, and especially if you're going for hundreds of meters on this sort of stuff. Now these little saplings are about 9 inches wide, and they're individually cut, of course, and they have to lay this down to prepare that track, or what they call the road, to get through. So this was quite interesting just to have a look at this. It's all the way through this area here where it was wet and mushy. So we better get back onto that track and keep following. Just up here on the right, this is what I believe is the first changeover station. So we'll just pull over and see what's there and have a chat. Well, this is our first changeover station as we've left Surat. This is called Frogmore Changeover Station. That's when they put fresh horses in and take the coach further. But back in the day, the farmers used to nail or put up the mailbox up in the tree so that when the mailmen come in the coaches, they didn't have to get off the coach. They could just hang it into the tree, or nail it into the tree, or drop it into the box. Pretty interesting. And you know, to think of those sort of things, of course it's going to be a lot easier, isn't it? Now, this area that we're traveling along at the moment, you know, where we've seen the corduroys and whatnot, the whole place floods over. So they can't get through, and sometimes they've got to get a coach in from a different angle or different end sort of thing. So therefore, they had to use this old steel boat. Now, it's still in the museum, and it's like cast iron. So it's a really heavy looking boat. And what they used to do is lay bitumen down in it to seal it and make sure it doesn't get rust in it and whatnot. But it's pretty amazing. But that's how they would get the people to the coaches, because when it's flooded, you just can't get through this sort of area here. And so they would just take them through with the boat. But you've got to check that one out. The Cobb Co branched into Queensland in 1865, and it started off with its run from Brisbane to Ipswich. Now, from there, in 1868, it went from Brisbane to Gympie. Now, they're long hauls, if you can imagine that, because, you know, it's not a short distance either way when you look at both them areas. Now, it started 2 runs a week from Brisbane to Gympie, and then from there, it branched all throughout Queensland doing the coach runs. And then you think about that, and you can imagine why they had 6,000 horses in stock, just to make sure that they could cover all the different areas throughout Australia. They had 3,000 horses in Queensland travelling 10,000 miles per week. 10,000 miles, that's crazy. So you can imagine how much they had to eat, and that equated to 33,000 tonnes per year of oats and corn. Wow. Times were hard, times were tough back in those days, that's for sure.
You know, when I mentioned about the oats, that was just oats. Then on top of that, they still had their hay and grass that they fed on as well.
Well, this is the Bambilla changeover station. Now, as the story goes, the Maryanne family actually looked after this area, and I think it was round in this vicinity. What they used to do is they would work on hearing the stagecoach coming in by the horses, or they would blow a bugle, let them know that they're coming, so they needed fresh horses. And then Mrs. Maryanne, she would set the table, make the tea, some scones, and get it ready for everybody. Now they did that until the Cobb Co stopped working. But after that, the horses still worked around this area for another 30 years, and they were bred for strong horse and speed. It's pretty amazing, and I love reading about this stuff and understanding how it was, and then you look around the vicinity of the area and you just go, wow, you know, you're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's people that are catering for other people as they travel through. It's a testament.
That's Sunnybank. You know, a fella by the name of Mr. Green. They reckon he was a bit of a funny sort of a character. He had a big white beard.
And when the grapes were in season, he'd feed everybody on the coach grapes. And he'd always be there for a good yarn and a good old yak. There was a few different stagecoaches built. Now, the ones they imported from America were called Concords or Jacks. Now, they were leather banded suspension sort of to make it a softer ride, and it was a smoother ride compared to the traditional springs or the metal underneath the carriages and whatnot, which caused a rougher ride. But at the same time, the Concord was a smaller carriage, a lighter carriage. It was built quite well in construction, but it couldn't carry nowhere near the amount of people or luggage. Where the traditional ones built here in Australia, example Charleville, they could carry 14 people as well as the luggage and whatnot. There was more storage and capacity with them. They were a heavier unit, of course. Now, when they run with the horses, they only run with 7 horses most of the time. Now, they had 2 on the sides, each side, and 3 up the middle. And then they only used 2 sets of reins. They had a set for the lead horse and the pole horse, and that was it. And that's how they steered these coaches. So it would have been an absolute art in so many ways, from how much weight you're carrying to steering it, controlling it, and understanding how that coach is going to work, and also how those horses are going to work. So it's something just to reminisce and think about on those days of travelling in a coach.
Something else to think about is how hard and challenging it would have been to navigate and working all this in bad weather conditions. The snow down south, the tropics up north, and the wet weather.
Well, this is another changeover station here, and they called this Duffy Camp, and everybody reckoned it was the favourite camp where everyone stopped at. Now, on this run, they actually run 2 stagecoach, one a 14-seater and the other one an 8-seater. So it's quite interesting to know that they actually had 2 runs on this one. But it was also, there was a hotel built here at one stage, and they called it the Goat Hotel. And the reason being is they used to serve the patrons goat, and that was a common thing here. But you look around, there's nothing left here in remains to know that this was a changeover station, there was a hotel here or anything else. But then later on, the O'Briens that were based here, they brought up another fella to run the place, and he became the licensee, keep it all running.
Sometime later, the old shanty pub was relocated to Wellgrave and became a new changeover station. And rumour has it that the changeover stations would change over every 5 years to another station area. Just a short track down the road, and I came across another point of interest. But after talking about food and pubs, I was getting a bit hungry myself, so it's time to have a bite to eat.
You know, I walk along here and it looks like a torrent of water has come through here at one stage, or it's a creek. But this is the last of the corduroys that are through here. As you can see, these ones that are laid down here are from the early 1900s. And so it's a testament to how long they actually last. And I believe it's cypress pine. So it's lasted the test of time, that's for sure. Now this goes from Grave right up to Wilbah, which is the next place up. But can you imagine how uncomfortable the ride would have been? Like I said earlier, these are 9 inches in diameter, most of them. And I can only imagine it'll be just like that all the way. So uncomfortable.
As the day's getting on and the sun's getting lower in the sky, I think I better make my way and continue the story. I get caught up sometimes in these places. They're amazing.
Well, we're at another change station. This is Hornick Spox, well known as the name Wilbah. So the people that were established here was William and Bertha, and that's how they got the name Wilbah. So they used the first 3 letters of William and then the first 2 letters of Bertha. Tragic thing happened in 1924 was when Will went off. He was crossing the Yuleba Creek and turned over the cart. They rushed him, well, back then you can't really do a rush, but they took him to Roma Hospital and that's where he passed away. And then Bertha moved to Toowoomba, where she ran a general store, but she passed away in 1933 at the age of 57. You know, and this is the great part about getting on these sort of trails and getting to read a bit about the area and the understanding of what actually happened. And so this is a really interesting trail that we're doing for the Cobb Co. And speaking of trails, well, it's that time of the afternoon where we better head and find our camp for the night.
Now this track may only be 76 kilometres long, but it's packed with history every step of the way. Roughly 36 kilometres of it is unsealed, with the rest of it fully sealed.
This is Maryanne campsite. This is where we're going to camp for the night. This is a free campsite along the Cobb Co trail that we've been doing. It's still great to see an old windmill in play. Like the old windmills up there, they channel the water across to the troughs here, but then you look at, like, the troughs are newer of course, but you look at the old posts, and if you look along it, they've got the second lot of posts. You've just got to sort of think how many years old this is, because it's obviously very, very old. Not the concrete side of things, but the wooden post side. We just heard the windmill going just before, so it'll be interesting to see how noisy it is at night when the wind gets up and going. Awesome spot. Now I'm going to go and have a bit of a look around here today because there's freshwater mussels. I see the shells laying around the place, and get myself a bit of a fire going. It's late in the afternoon, so it'll be nice to just kick back, relax and just take in this view. It's spectacular, beautiful.
You know, I'm really loving the new setup. So far, it's working an absolute treat. At the end of a long day of driving, it's nice just to be able to set up camp in a few seconds, which means more time to look around camp and kick back and enjoy a nice fire with a good cup of coffee. Doesn't get much better than that, especially with the views around here.
We've had to do this traditionally. Because we're on the Cobb Co track, we're going to have steak and veg. Something plain and simple, but you know, you can make it as tasty as you like. Now, back in those days, they had a galah stew, they had a goat stew, they had steak, they had all sorts of different things. But it's quite interesting when you're reading some of the stuff that happened on the Cobb Co trips and how they used to stop and have a feed and whatnot. But in general,
the old steak and veg. So I'll chop up some potato. We'll have it a bit more flavour in ours, but you know, it'll be all good to just start there. Get the old water on the boil. Now the reason I'm not just putting it straight on the grill is I'm putting it in the fry pan so we can put the butter in there and give it a bit of extra flavour, but at the same time, I don't think you can ever get enough salt on your steak, right? So give it a bit of a smooth in, pop that on, nice sizzle so you can get it sealed. Well, I'm going to bog into a bit of tucker, sit back, enjoy the night, turn these lights off, enjoy the moon, the stars, and the bush TV, of course, and then get back into our adventure tomorrow morning. So I really want to put the power system through its paces. Now, we've had camera gear on all night, and now I'm cooking up breakfast on the induction cooker, and we'll have some bacon and eggs because we've got a full day of travel. But we've brought the batteries down to, they're sitting at 52% now. So that's overnight with all the camera gear charging. Now cooking will be all charged back up to 100% before we know it during the course of the day. But the great part is, it's been like that every day that we've done this so far, because like I cook on gas, I cook on fire. I've never really done much cooking on the induction, so it's just a new thing to try out. And look, next trip I'll be up in Fraser Island. I'll be using this one a lot.
Maryanne Campground made for a great overnight stop. There's also a free camp just 2 kilometres out of Surat, right by the river, at the start of the track. I'd recommend staying there the night before, so you can hit the track first thing in the morning and reach Maryanne Campground by early afternoon.
I get super excited about this stuff because I actually love the culture and understanding what goes on and how it was created and what they did and all that sort of stuff. Now I'm right here at the water wells. Now this is a significant place to the Aboriginals where they used to capture water. They would light a fire on it and make it absolutely boiling red hot. And then they would put cold water on it. And then with that, it would make it fragile. And then they could chip away and make it into a bowl, which then would turn into the well to store and hold the water. Now, as you can see on this one, it steps from there down to here and then into here and holds in there. And that's what I find fantastic. And then when it overflows, it's just going to continue on down this little rocky crescent into like a holding area or a dam or a waterway down there. And when you think about it, through Maryanne, the waterways, that's what they call the waterways through here, is Maryanne, they have dated back to 8,000 years ago, and they found tooling along the riverside banks and whatnot of this area. The fishing net people, their actual name is Maryanne tribe that were here. And they got the name from Sir Thomas Major Mitchell. Now he was an explorer, a surveyor in the area, and what happened was he was sitting there back in 1845, 1846, watching the tribe make fishing nets for their fishing, because of course these are water people. Now that I just find it amazing. But anyway, I want to take you over to these wells over here. You can sort of start to see the depth of how deep these holes are because there's water in them.
We've got 3 storages right there. So I think it's quite significant, and it's especially something of interest for anybody to understand, because you can actually look down them and see the hollowing of them.
Well, we've got one more changeover station before we hit the town of Yuleba. An interesting fact is a Cobb Co driver back in 1884 used to earn about 10 to 15 pound per week. That's a lot of money back then.
And the average trip for a passenger would be £5 per day. So the trip from Surat to Wilbah would cost a total of £10. That would be equivalent to a full week's wage, and in today's economy would be $400.
Well, this is the last changeover station on the Cobb Co Way. This is Pleasant Fields. Now the little story here goes that John and Mary Leitch, they were here until the early 1900s. But in that time, they had 2 children. They used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and they would have to run 3.2 kilometres to get the horses ready before the stagecoach would get here, which is pretty crazy. And when you think of it, we're 8 miles from Yuleba, and then we'll be in the little town. Now back in 1902, 1903, there was a drought and they actually had to import the oats for the horses to feed them. So imagine that, having to import instead of using our own country for it. Well, we're going to head into Yuleba now because I've got something of interest in there. Before we get into the town of Yuleba, I thought we'd drop into the cemetery and see Alf Jensen's grave. Now, Alf Jensen was a young fellow that done the Cobb Co trail from Surat to Yuleba in 1911, and earlier than that, of course. But he passed away after traveling in torrential rain for many days and got pneumonia. He spent 3 weeks in hospital and then he passed on that. But he was remembered by an awful lot of people for what he actually did, and he'd done it for a long time. He left his wife and 5 kids behind when it happened. But I also wanted to touch on Fred Thompson. Now Fred Tomo Thompson was the last driver who drove the stagecoach from Surat to Yuleba in 1924, August of 1924. Well, we've made it to the town of Yuleba. Now, we've followed the traditional way that the Cobb Co went, and that was from Surat to Yuleba. Now, you can do that either way because it'll take you on the same journey, but it just gives you the understanding of what actually happened. Now, it all wrapped up, the Cobb Co side of things, in 1929, but the last run was in 1924, in August 24, and that was the last run to here.
Every 5 years, the 2 towns hold a Cobb Co festival, celebrating the history and heritage of the Australian bush. They held the 100-year celebration last year in 2024, where they followed the same track in the old coaches. And they get a fair old crowd out here just for that.
Well, thanks for joining me on this journey. I hope you enjoyed it. Bit of history, but if you're out this way, hey, you've got to take a look at this. It's great. There's a lot to learn and understand. See you next time.